You'll sleep above the garage. That was the first thing I heard when I walked into the $1 million house that had just been left to me in a will. Nobody greeted me. Nobody asked which room I'd want. They just decided where I'd sleep the way you toss an old, useless thing into the back of a storage shed. I froze in the doorway. My hand still clenched the envelope with the inheritance papers inside. And the woman giving me orders was lounging in my brother's favorite armchair, like she'd owned this house for years. My own granddaughter didn't even bother to look up. She was texting, giggling, while her grandfather stood there like a stranger who'd wandered into the wrong address. And here's the part that almost made me laugh. Not one person in that room knew the truth. They'd had 4 days. 4 days to divide up 4 days to talk about selling off the land, and to plan how they'd push me out of their lives all over again. Just like 8 years ago, the day they drove me to a cheap motel off the highway, threw my suitcase down onto the pavement, left me there with less than $100 in my pocket, then drove off, without looking back once. They thought today would be exactly like that day. They thought I was still the washed-up old man the whole family could order around. They thought I had nowhere left to go, no one left to lean on, no right left to speak. They were wrong. And in just a few more minutes, when my brother's lawyer walked through that door, every last one of their schemes was about to come crashing down. I'm telling this story today because that shame held me prisoner for 8 long years, and I don't want it holding anyone else prisoner ever again. There are lessons you only learn after you've lost everything. This is one of them. My name is Walter Boyd. I'm 67 years old, and for the last 8 years, I lived in a one-room apartment on the east side of Asheville, North Carolina, in a building called Cedar Glen that smelled like other people's dinners and old carpet. The phone rang at 6:52 on a Wednesday morning. I'd been awake since 5, the way I always was, stirring instant coffee in a chipped mug and watching the parking lot fill up with the cars of people who still had somewhere to be. I almost didn't pick up. The only people who called me were collection agencies and robocalls about my car's extended warranty, and I didn't even have a car anymore. But my hand reached for that cheap phone before my brain caught up. "Is this Walter Boyd?" The voice was careful, lawyer careful. "My name is Dennis Hale. I'm calling about your brother, Raymond." My stomach went cold. Raymond and I hadn't talked much in years. A card at Christmas. A short call on my birthday that always ended too soon because neither of us knew how to say the things we meant. But he was the only one. The only person sharing my blood who hadn't shut the door on me when my life came apart. "What about Ray?" I asked, and I heard my own voice shaking. "I'm very sorry to tell you that your brother passed away 3 days ago. A stroke. The caretaker found him in the kitchen of the property out in Leicester." The words didn't land all at once. They came in pieces, like something breaking in slow motion across the room. I sat down in the recliner I'd bought for $9 at an estate sale, the one with the spring that bit into my back if I leaned wrong. Ray. Gone. Just like that. "Mr. Boyd? Are you with me?" "I'm here," I said. "I'm here. I understand this is difficult. But I need to speak with you about his estate. You're named as the sole beneficiary." I laughed. It came out ugly and surprised even me. "There's a mistake." Ray barely knew me at the end. "No mistake, sir. You've inherited the entire property. The farmhouse, the outbuildings, just under 200 acres. I'll need you to come sign the paperwork when you're able." After I hung up, I sat there a long time, staring at the brown water stain on my ceiling that had been spreading a little wider every month, like the building itself was slowly giving up. Ray's farm. I remembered being a boy there, running through fields that went on forever while our parents fought in the kitchen with the windows shut, back when family was a thing I trusted without thinking about it. Let me tell you about 8 years ago, because you can't understand what came later without it. I was 59. I'd poured a sheet metal floor and built warehouse frames for the same company for 26 years. Then the contracts dried up and the layoffs came down like a guillotine, fast and final. One Friday I had a paycheck and a small house with a mortgage I was almost done paying. By the next month I was standing in the living room of my son Daniel's house in the nice part of Hendersonville, holding my cap in my hands like a man begging at a back door. Daniel was 34 then, married 6 years to a woman named Renee, with 2 kids I'd assumed I would help raise. "Dad, this is honestly really awkward," Daniel said. And he said it to the floor, not to me. I'd been so proud of him. My boy with the good job and the house with the columns out front and the wife who dressed like every Tuesday was a board meeting. Renee came into the doorway with her arms folded. Her face had already finished the conversation before it started. "Walter, we've discussed this," she said. "We have our own family to think about. The kids, the mortgage. We can't take on more right now." More. That's what I'd become to my own son. More. "It would only be temporary," I said, and I hated how thin my voice sounded. "Just till I land something." Daniel finally looked at me, and what I saw in his face was worse than anger. It was embarrassment. "Dad, you're almost 60. You've got nothing put away. No plan. How is that supposed to be our problem?" I wanted to remind them. I wanted to list it all out. The $18,000 I'd pulled from my own retirement to cover the down payment on that house with the columns. The whole summer I babysat both kids, so Renee could go back to work. The weekends I spent under their sink, on their roof, building the back deck where they hosted their friends, and never once mentioned who'd built it. But standing in that perfect room, surrounded by framed photos that somehow never included me, I understood that none of it counted. I wasn't a father anymore. I was a line item, a liability. "There's a motel out on Route 9, Renee said, already walking toward the front door to open it. "Weekly rates, very reasonable." That was 8 years ago. I never saw the inside of that house again. So now you understand why. Sitting in my $9 chair with a dead brother and a farm I'd never asked for, I couldn't let myself feel hope. Because in my experience, when life finally hands you something good, it hands you a bill stapled to the back of it. I just didn't know yet how high that bill would climb. It took me 3 weeks to drive out to the property. 3 weeks of paperwork and lawyers and nights staring at the ceiling. The lawyer arranged a rental car for me, and when I finally turned up that long gravel drive, the place stole the breath right out of me. Green hills folding into each other all the way to the ridgeline. A 2-story farmhouse with a wraparound porch and a swing that still moved a little in the wind. Barns and sheds that spoke of a whole life lived well and quietly. I'd been sleeping in the farmhouse exactly 5 nights when I heard engines on the gravel. I looked out the kitchen window, and my whole body went still. A white SUV and a gray crew cab pickup were rolling up the drive, dragging clouds of dust behind them. Daniel climbed out of the SUV first in pressed slacks and a golf shirt, like he was headed somewhere with a dress code. Then Renee, blonde hair perfect after a 2-hour drive. Behind them, 2 near strangers I was supposed to know. Mia, my granddaughter, 17 now, and Caleb, 15, taller than his father, looking at the ground like the dirt had insulted him. My hands shook as I set down my coffee. 8 years. 8 years of total silence, and here they were. I opened the door before they could knock. I stood on the porch like a man guarding a gate. Daniel at least had the grace to look uneasy. Renee's smile was bright and certain and aimed straight at me. "Dad," Daniel said, with that fake warmth people use when they're trying to convince themselves. "You look good, real good." I said nothing. Renee came up the steps, her heels knocking on the old boards. She carried a leather bag the size of a small suitcase, and she had the look of a woman who'd already scripted the whole afternoon. "Walter, we were so sorry to hear about Raymond," she said, every word soaked in a grief she'd never owned. "We'd have come to the service, but we didn't find out in time." That was a lie. Ray's obituary ran in the paper, and I knew for a fact Renee read the obituaries the way some people read scripture. Looking for openings, looking for angles. "What do you want?" I asked. Daniel shifted his weight. "Dad, come on. We're family. We should have been here for you." Where was my family 8 years ago? Renee's smile tightened, just a hair. "Walter, I know there were misunderstandings before, but that's the past. We're here to help now." I looked at Mia and Caleb, these 2 grown strangers who used to be my grandchildren. Mia was typing fast, thumbs flying, eyes down. Caleb kicked a piece of gravel with a sneaker that probably cost more than my month's rent used to. They didn't remember me. Why would they? They'd been 9 and 7 when their parents decided I wasn't worth the space. "Help with what?" I said. Renee spread her arms toward the hills like a realtor. "Walter, this is a lot for one man. And honestly, at your age, out here alone, it isn't safe. What if you fall? What if something happens and no one's here?" Daniel jumped in, eager to back her. "She's right, Dad. This place is enormous. We've talked it over, and we think the best thing is for all of us to live out here together. Share the load." Something cold settled in my gut. "Exactly," Renee said, her eyes lighting up. We'd take the master suite upstairs, it's perfect for the four of us. And you could have the guest room, or she paused, scanning the property with open calculation. You might actually be more comfortable in that finished space over the garage. Separate entrance. Real private. The room over the garage. They wanted to file me away above the cars, in the house I'd inherited, like a box of old paperwork. We've already started talking to the kids about switching schools, Daniel went on, warming up. Caleb's pumped about ranch life, right, bud? Caleb looked up just long enough to mutter, I guess. Then Mia spoke for the first time, in a flat, entitled drawl. Do we seriously have to live here? There's literally nothing to do, and the Wi-Fi's probably garbage. It's temporary, Renee said fast, shooting her daughter a look that could have frozen a creek. Just until things settle. Until things settle. I knew exactly what that meant. They'd move in, take over inch by inch, and quietly ease me out of my own walls, until I was the hired help on the deed. No, I said. Renee blinked. Excuse me? I said no. You're not moving in. Daniel's face went red. Dad, be reasonable. We're trying to help you. The same way you helped me 8 years ago? For just a second, Renee's mask slipped, and I saw the hard machinery underneath. Walter, I think you're being unfair. We were in a difficult spot back then. We had young kids. And now you've got older kids who need college money, I said. Funny how your difficult spots always end up involving my money. I want to pause here, because I need to tell you what was happening inside me while I stood on that porch. Part of me, a big, tired part, wanted to fold. The loneliness of those 8 years had a weight to it, a physical heaviness that pressed on my ribs in the dark, and these were my grandchildren. My only son. A voice in my head whispered, maybe she's right. Maybe you can't do this alone. Maybe this is the last chance you get to be wanted. And then I looked at Renee's face. And I saw the triumph sitting there, plain as morning. She was already redecorating that master bedroom in her mind. She was already measuring me for the door. Get off my property, I said quietly. Her eyes flashed. You'll regret this, Walter. When you're sitting alone in this big empty house wondering why nobody visits, you remember that this was your choice. They piled back into their vehicles. But at the end of the drive, the SUV stopped. I watched Daniel get out and walk back toward me. Alone this time, his shoulders sloped like a man carrying something he couldn't set down. Dad, he said when he reached the steps. I'm sorry. About everything. About back then. About today. He looked in that moment, more like the boy I'd taught to throw a curveball than the man he'd turned into. She found out about the inheritance from Cousin Wade. She's been planning this for weeks. Of course she had. She'd probably started planning the day Ray's name hit the obituary page. I can't keep doing this, Daniel, I said. I can't keep pretending what happened didn't happen. I know. I just hoped maybe we could fix it. Some things stay broken, son. He stood there a long moment like he wanted to say more. Then he just nodded and walked back to the car. And as I watched them disappear down the road, I felt something I hadn't felt in 8 years, the strange, steadying weight of having stood my ground. Honestly, if that had been me 10 years earlier, I'd have caved. I'd have handed over the keys and told myself it was love. So I want to say this to you directly. If you have ever been worn so thin by loneliness that you'd accept being mistreated just to not be alone, I see you. That hunger is real, but it is not the same thing as being loved, and you are allowed to know the difference. But I also knew it wasn't over. Renee wasn't built to quit after one loss, especially not with this kind of money on the table. The first letter showed up 3 days later, tucked in the back of Ray's desk drawer behind a stack of insurance folders. My name was on the envelope in his blocky handwriting. I'd been digging through his papers all week, trying to make sense of the farm's finances, when I found it. Walt, it began. If you're reading this, I'm gone, and you've inherited more than land. You've inherited a job I couldn't finish keeping the vultures off you. The ones who only ever circle when they smell something worth taking. My hands started to tremble. Ray had known. Somehow he'd known exactly what would happen the second Daniel and Renee got wind of the inheritance. I've watched from a distance for 8 years, brother. I know what they did to you. I know they'll try it again. So I made arrangements. The second letter was in the largest barn, hidden inside an old coffee tin on the highest shelf. Finding it felt like a scavenger hunt Ray had built just for me. This one was longer, and what it held turned my blood to ice. Ray had documented everything. He'd hired a private investigator to track Daniel and Renee's finances for over a year. The shiny life they showed the world was held together with credit cards and baling wire. Their house was mortgaged past the rafters. Daniel's contracting business was sinking, and Renee had been maxing out cards to keep the whole performance running. "They're drowning, Walt," the letter said, "and they see you as the only thing left to grab on the way down. Don't let them pull you under." But it was the third letter locked in a safe deposit box, the key left with the lawyer that showed me the full shape of what my brother had done. Inside was an amendment to the will, a codicil, signed and witnessed. I sat in Dennis Hale's office reading it with my mouth open. Ray had anticipated every single move. "Mr. Boyd," the lawyer said, "your brother was very precise. The property can't be subdivided or sold for 5 years. During that time, you must live in the main house alone. No family member may establish residence here without breaking the terms. And if I break them, the land reverts to the state as a conservation preserve. Your family gets nothing." Ray had made it legally impossible for them to move in, while making sure I could never be pressured into selling and splitting the proceeds. It was brilliant. It was exactly the kind of quiet, ferocious protection I should have expected from him. He'd also set up a trust to cover the taxes, the upkeep, the operating costs for a decade, and left me a list of honest workers and neighbors I could trust. And there was one more thing. A sealed envelope marked, "Open only if they come back." They came back on a Thursday, 3 weeks after the first time. And this time Renee brought an army. Her parents, Glenn and Marjorie, and Daniel's sister, Paula, whom I hadn't laid eyes on since her wedding. I watched from the kitchen window as they arranged themselves on my lawn like a chess opening. Glenn carried a briefcase. Marjorie carried a camera. Paula looked like she'd rather be anywhere else but came anyway. Renee knocked with the confidence of a woman holding a winning hand. When I opened the door, she wore black and her most sorrowful face. "Walter, we need to talk. As a family, my family is in the ground next to my brother." Glenn stepped forward and puffed up his chest. "Now you listen here, young man. That's no way to speak to your daughter-in-law." I almost laughed. I was 67. Nobody had called me young man since the Carter administration. Renee stopped being my daughter-in-law 8 years ago. She made that real clear. Marjorie started snapping photos. The house, the barns, me on the porch. "For the insurance assessment," she said when she caught me staring. "What insurance assessment?" Renee's smile turned predatory. "Walter, we've done some research. A property like this needs serious liability coverage, especially with you living alone. One fall, one accident, one lawsuit, and you could lose all of it." Paula spoke up, quiet and uncomfortable. "Dad," she still called Daniel's father, "that maybe we should talk about this privately." "There's nothing private to discuss," I said. "This is my land. I want all of you off it." Glenn opened the briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "We've consulted attorneys, Walter. There are grounds to contest this will. A court might well find it unreasonable for a man your age to manage a property this size alone." "Are you threatening me?" "We're offering a partnership," Renee said smoothly. "We move in, we share the costs and the work, everyone wins." Otherwise, she shrugged, legal battles are long and expensive. And exhausting. At your age, is that really how you want to spend your last good years? I looked at Daniel, who hadn't said a single word through any of it. His face was red with shame. But he wasn't stopping his wife. He was just letting it happen, same as 8 years ago. And that's when I remembered the last envelope. I want to slow this part down, because this is the moment everything turned, and I've replayed it 10,000 times since. "Excuse me," I said. "I need to get something." I left them standing on the porch and walked back through the house to Ray's study. My footsteps echoed on the wood floor. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. But my hands, and I remember this clearly, my hands were perfectly steady. I took the envelope down from the coffee tin where I'd hidden it. I broke the seal, and I read Ray's last words to me. "Walt, if they're pushing lawyers, show them the photographs. If they're threatening your money, show them the bank statements. If they're claiming you're not fit to manage this place, show them the medical evaluation I had a doctor put on file in your name. I've given you everything you need. Use it." Inside were copies of the investigator's report, photographs of Renee at expensive restaurants, at department store counters, bags hanging off both arms, all while Daniel's business was supposedly drowning, bank statements showing cash advances from a half-dozen credit cards, paperwork on 3 separate loans they'd taken against their house, and a small audio recorder with a single file on it. I walked back out to the porch holding the folder. Renee was mid-sentence, explaining how the garage space could be converted into a real apartment when I cut her off. "Renee," I said, "how's Daniel's business doing these days?" She blinked, thrown off. It's fine. Why? Funny. Because these records say you've borrowed against your house 3 times in 2 years, and these statements show $43,000 in credit card debt. The color drained out of her face. Glenn stepped forward fast. "Where did you get those?" My brother hired an investigator. He was very thorough. I pulled out the photographs and held them up one by one. "Here's Renee at a steakhouse downtown last month. Lunch came to $310. And here she is buying a handbag that cost more than I used to pay in rent." Daniel stared at the photos, his face going gray. "Renee, you told me those were client meetings." "I was networking," she said quickly. "Business expenses." "Business expenses," I said, "for a company that's bleeding out." Then I held up the recorder. "Would you all like to hear what Renee really thinks about this family reunion?" I pressed play. For a moment there was nothing but the hiss of a coffee shop. And then Renee's voice came out clear and sharp into the still afternoon air. Her own voice, talking to a friend, saying the old man was probably going senile anyway. Saying that once they got him declared incompetent, they could take control of the whole thing. Saying the ranch had to be worth $2 million, easy. Saying they could carve it up, sell it off in parcels, clear every debt they had, and still walk away rich. Nobody moved. Paula's hand went to her mouth. Marjorie lowered the camera. Glenn snapped the briefcase shut so hard it cracked like a gunshot. And Daniel looked at his wife with an expression I had never seen on his face in 34 years. Total betrayal, with the slow dawn of understanding underneath it. "You planned this," he said, barely above a whisper. "You've been planning this since the day we found out." Renee's composure finally broke. "Daniel, I can explain." "Explain what?" "How you've been lying to me for weeks? How you've been blowing money we don't have while our son's college fund sits at zero? We needed this, Daniel. We need this place." "No," I said quietly. "You wanted it. There's a difference. And here's where I have to be fair to her, because I promised you I'd tell this straight. Renee wasn't a monster. I've thought about her a lot since that day. She grew up watching her own parents claw and worry over money. And somewhere along the way she decided the world was a cold place that takes everything from you if you blink. In her mind, every dollar spent on me was a dollar stolen from her kids. She'd built a whole religion out of fear, and in that religion, cruelty got to call itself responsibility. She honestly believed she was the only grown-up in the room making the hard choices nobody else had the stomach for. That's the thing about people who do terrible things to their family. Most of them have a story where they're the hero. Hers just finally got played back out loud, in her own voice, with the volume up. The whole gathering came apart right there on my lawn. Glenn and Marjorie hurried to their car, wanting no part of an exposed scheme. Paula mumbled an apology and followed them, and Daniel stood on my porch staring at his wife like he was seeing her for the very first time. 8 years, he said. 8 years you told me my dad was the problem, that he was irresponsible, that he made his own bed. He did make his own bed, Renee snapped, the mask completely gone now. He lost his job, lost his house, came crawling to us. We had every right to protect our family. Our family, Daniel repeated. What about him? He's my father. Her laugh was bitter and cold. Your father is a loser, Daniel. Always has been. The only reason we're even standing here is that his brother felt sorry for him. And that was the moment something broke loose in Daniel's face. Whatever grip she'd held on him for 8 years finally tore. Get in the car, he told her. As they drove off, I noticed Daniel's truck didn't follow her SUV. They turned in opposite directions at the end of the road. And somehow I knew they weren't headed to the same place ever again. Ray hadn't just left me a farm. He'd left me the tools to fight, and the proof that I was worth fighting for. Daniel called 3 days later. I was on the porch watching the sun go down over the pasture when the phone buzzed. Dad, his voice was raw. Can I come see you? Alone this time, Renee's at her mother's. I almost said no. The peaceful thing, the safe thing, was to keep my distance. But something in his voice carried the ghost of the boy who used to bring me coffee on Saturdays while I worked in the garage. All right, I said, but just you. He showed up in a battered rental, looking like he hadn't slept in a week. When he climbed the steps, I could see the whole disaster sitting in his shoulders. Renee took the SUV, he said, dropping into the chair beside me. And the checking account, 12,000, gone. I didn't say anything. There wasn't much that wouldn't sound like I told you so. I keep thinking about that recording, he said, about what she said. The worst part is, I knew she was planning something. I knew, and I went along with it anyway. Why? He was quiet a long time. The crickets started up in the dark. Because it was easier than admitting I'd made a mistake 8 years ago. Easier than facing what we did to you. He told me how she'd controlled everything for years, what he wore, where they went, who they saw. How she'd convinced him cutting me off was protecting the kids. And I believed her because if she was right, then I wasn't the son who abandoned his father. I wanted to be the good guy in my own head so bad I let you be the villain. I looked at my son and saw how much 8 years had aged him. Lines around his eyes. A tiredness that went past the body. What do you want from me, Daniel? I don't know. Forgiveness. A chance to fix it. Some things can't be fixed. I know. But maybe we could build something new. And then he told me the rest. The business was bankrupt and had been for months. Renee had filed for divorce. Turned out she'd been seeing her personal trainer for half a year. He had about 6 weeks before the bank took the house. He'd be starting over from nothing, in his 40s, the same way I'd started over in my 50s. The irony wasn't lost on me. 8 years ago he'd turned me away from his door. Now he was sitting on my porch facing the exact same darkness. Dad, he said, almost too quiet to hear. I know I've got no right, but is there any chance I could stay here? Just for a while. I'll work. The garage room, a couch, anything. I don't have anywhere to go. There it was, the moment I'd been dreading since the day I got the keys. And I want to tell you, the old Walter, the one who'd been beaten down for 8 years, wanted to say yes on the spot. Wanted to grab this reconciliation with both hands, even if it cost me everything Ray built to protect me. But a newer, harder-earned part of me knew it wasn't that simple. Daniel, I need you to understand something. This place isn't just property. It's my security. My peace. Ray left it to me on the condition that I live here alone for 5 years. If I let you stay, I could lose all of it. His face fell. I understand. I wouldn't ask you to risk that. Wouldn't you? What happens in 6 weeks when the house is gone? What happens when her lawyer comes after you for support and you're desperate, and the only thing your family can touch is this ranch? He flinched like I'd hit him. You think I'd try to take it from you? I think desperate people make desperate choices. 8 years ago you chose your wife's comfort over your father's survival. What makes you sure you wouldn't choose it again? Because I've learned. Have you? Or are you just out of other options? The question hung there in the dark. He stared at the black hills, his hands clenched. You're right, he said finally. You're absolutely right. I chose her over you because it was easier and she made me feel like a protector instead of a coward. And now I know exactly what that choice feels like from the other side. I studied his face in the dim porch light. He looked genuinely broken. But I'd seen real remorse before. I'd felt it myself, after the layoffs, after the house. Remorse is easy when you're at the bottom. The test is what you do on the way back up. I want to help you, I said. You're still my son. But I can't risk the ranch. So here's what I can do. I told him about Hollis Tate, a rancher about 15 miles out whose grown son had moved to Denver, leaving an empty cabin. Hollis needed someone to house sit and handle maintenance in exchange for cheap rent. I'll put in a word. But hear me, this isn't me rescuing you. This is me handing you information about an honest opportunity. What you make of it is on you. He nodded slowly. What would I have to do? Prove you've changed. Not with speeches. With work. Get a job, any job. Start paying down the debt. Show me you can carry your own life instead of handing it to someone else to fix. And if you do that, then maybe, in 5 years when the conditions lift, we talk about what we want to be to each other. But Daniel, this is not a promise that it all goes back to how it was. Too much happened for that. In 5 years you'll still be the son who left. I'll still be the father who watched. We can build something new. We can't unbreak the old thing. He sat with that for a long while. Then he stood and squared his shoulders in a way that reminded me of the stubborn little kid he used to be. Can I call you? Let you know how it goes with the cabin? You can call. But Daniel, if you ever call me again asking for money, or a roof, or anything other than a conversation between two grown men trying to figure out if they can be in each other's lives, then it's over for good. Understand? I understand. Daniel got the job at Hollis Tate's place. He called a week later, and there was something in his voice I hadn't heard since he was young. Exhaustion mixed with a kind of pride. It's fence work, mostly, he said. Feeding cattle, fixing what breaks. It's honest. I forgot what that felt like. We talked for 20 minutes, the longest we'd talked in 8 years. He didn't ask for a thing. And over the months that followed, that became the pattern. A call every few weeks, always short. Work, weather, small wins, small setbacks. He picked up a second job at the feed store. He started going to a support group for divorced fathers. He saw the kids twice that first year, quick, painful visits that left him hollow, because Renee had married the trainer and moved everyone to Charlotte. But he kept working, kept paying, kept proving the thing I'd asked him to prove. This is the part of the story I most want you to hold on to, so let me say it plain. The mistake most people make is thinking forgiveness and trust are the same thing. They're not. I forgave my son a long time before I trusted him, because forgiveness was something I did for my own heart, so I could stop carrying the weight. But trust he had to earn, brick by brick, with his hands. What Renee never understood, what nobody in that crowd on my lawn understood, is that the people who love you don't ask to be handed everything on the strength of an apology. They show up. They do the unglamorous work. They let you watch them change. About 8 months after that night on the porch, Daniel mentioned something on a call that I couldn't shake. He'd been moving cattle with Hollis up near my property line and spotted a structure on the far north end of the land, past a stand of old oaks. Said Hollis thought Ray might have owned more than just the main ranch. The next morning I drove up the north pasture on a dirt track I'd never followed, winding through the oak grove. The land out there was wilder, rolling and grassy, scattered with cedars. And tucked in a small valley, maybe 2 miles from the farmhouse, sat a little stone cottage, rough limestone walls, a tin roof gone soft gray with age, windows catching the morning light, a covered porch and old oaks throwing shade. The whole place had a stillness to it that made my chest ache. The door was unlocked. Inside, one big room with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen, a sleeping loft up a wooden ladder. Simple, sturdy furniture. Bookshelves full of volumes on ranching and philosophy and poetry. And on the table, another envelope with my name on it. Walt. If you found this, you're starting to understand the real size of what I left you. This cottage sits on 50 acres that are legally separate from the main ranch. Different deed, different rules. No restrictions at all. I bought it 15 years ago as a place to go when the world got too loud. I always meant it for you. But that wasn't the last surprise. Behind the books on philosophy was a folder. Inside were architectural drawings, plans to expand the cottage into a small retreat. Cost estimates. Preliminary permits. Ray had imagined 6 small cabins scattered across the hillside, a common building for meals, walking trails through the hills. I've watched Daniel struggle this past year, the letter said. I know you've been talking. I know you're trying to decide whether to trust him. This place might be the answer to both. I've set aside a separate trust to fund construction. This could be a refuge for older men who've lost their families, their homes, their sense of why they get up in the morning. Men like you were 8 years ago. Men like Daniel might be now. I sat in that quiet cottage for hours. My brother had seen something I'd missed, a way to turn the worst thing that ever happened to me into something that could catch other people before they hit the ground. That night I called Daniel. How would you feel about a change of work? 3 days later he drove up to the cottage, and I watched his face go from confusion to wonder. I showed him the drawings, the plan, the trust. He studied it all with the same focus he'd once poured into a failing business, but with something different in him now. Less panic, more genuine care. A retreat, he said finally, for men who've lost everything. Men like us. Men like us, I said. Dad, this is exactly what I needed 8 years ago. A place to go, work to do, people who got it, then help me build it, not as charity, as a partner. Ray left the money for construction, but I need someone to run the project. Someone who knows what it's like to start over from nothing. But Daniel, we do this as partners, with a real stake and real responsibility. The conditions on the main ranch stand for 4 more years. The cottage is separate. If we do this, we do it as 2 men building something, not as a father and son trying to glue a relationship back together with a work project. He went quiet, staring at the hills. I'd want to change some of these plans, he said. Add a workshop, space for group counseling, and some kind of job training piece. I've been thinking about what I would have needed. What I still need, honestly. He looked at me. Dad, I can't promise I won't mess up. I can't promise this fixes us. But I can promise I'll work harder on this than anything in my life. Why? Because for the first time in years I get to build something instead of just trying to save what's already wrecked. I looked at my son and saw, not the desperate man who'd begged for a couch 8 months back, but someone who might actually be able to help other men find their way home. All right, I said. Let's build something. 2 years later, I stood on the porch of that cottage and watched the sun come up over the Tate's Creek retreat. 6 cabins on the hillside, each one home to 2 men working their way back to themselves. The common building was already alive with morning coffee brewing, low conversation, the easy rhythm of men who'd found their feet again. Daniel came out of the workshop wiping sawdust off his hands. At 45, he looked healthier than he had in years, weathered and finally at peace. Morning, Dad. Frank and Marcus both have job interviews next week. Frank was a 63-year-old machinist whose wife had left after 30 years and taken the house. Marcus was a 57-year-old bookkeeper wiped out by a partner's fraud. They'd both arrived bitter and hollow. 6 months of honest work and real community had given them back their worth. We'd helped a string of men move on to independent lives, and most of them stayed close, meeting for coffee in town every Saturday. They'd built their own little network of the recovered. That afternoon, Daniel told me Mia wanted to visit. My granddaughter was 18 now, graduating, asking questions Renee couldn't answer about why she never saw her father's family. She came on a Thursday in June, driving a small car, tall like her father with a sharp, careful intelligence in her eyes that reminded me of my own mother. She shook my hand. "It's nice to meet you, sir." "Sir." Not Grandpa. The formality was a wall, and I understood that anything more would have to be earned. But over 3 days, she threw herself into the place. She helped in the workshop, hiked with the men, sat in on an evening discussion. She listened to Frank talk about the shame of being a failure at 63, and to Marcus describe losing not just his money, but the respect that came with it. On her last morning, she found me in the garden behind the cottage, picking tomatoes for dinner. "Grandpa," she said the first time, and my throat closed up. "Mom always said you and Dad were selfish, that you abandoned the family. But watching those men, they're not selfish. They got knocked down, and they're trying to stand up. That's not the same thing." She paused. "Do you think Dad and I can ever have something real?" I set down the basket and looked at this young woman carrying pieces of all of us. "I think your father spent 2 years learning to be the man he always could have been. Whether you build something with him depends on whether you're both willing to start fresh, instead of trying to repair something that broke before you were old enough to understand it." "And you and me?" "I missed having a granddaughter," I said. "I missed all of it. But the best things I've learned out here aren't about going back to what was. They're about building what never existed before." She smiled then. The first completely open expression I'd seen from her. I'd like that. As I watched her drive away that afternoon, I felt something I hadn't felt since before my whole world came down, not hope built on other people changing, but hope built on the knowledge that a person can choose to become a better version of themselves. Ray gave me more than a ranch and a cottage. He gave me the chance to find out that losing everything can be the place where you finally find what actually matters. So now I want to hear from you, because you stayed with me all the way to the end, and that means something. I'm genuinely curious where you land on this. If you think I was right to refuse my son that night on the porch and make him earn his way back, comment the number 1. If you think I should have just let him stay, that family is family, and forgiveness should come with open doors, comment the number 2. And if you think the truth is somewhere in the middle, that I owed him forgiveness but not my security, comment the number 3. There's no wrong answer. I just want to know how you see it. And tell me where you're watching from, and what time it is there right now, because it amazes me to think of all the different places and hours this story is reaching people. Drop your city. Have you ever sat in a room where the people who were supposed to love you looked right through you like you weren't even there? If you have, you already understand this story better than I could ever explain it. If anything in here moved you, or made you think about someone in your own life, do me a small favor and subscribe, so the next person who needs to hear a story like this one can find their way to it too. It's just me and stories like this, and you being here is what keeps them going. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences. fully rewritten and reimagined in Asheville, North Carolina to create original content. Any resemblance to real people or events is coincidental.